everybody, it's Lou here, the Rocker Witch. Welcome to my channel if you're new, and welcome back if you're not. I am going to be talking today about the upcoming ingress of Pluto into the sign of Aquarius. So I'm filming this today on Sunday, March the 19th, and Pluto's going to move into the sign of Aquarius on Thursday, March 23rd, 2023. And he's going to be there until June 11th of 2023, when he's going to retrograde back briefly into Capricorn. And then in 2024, he moves into Pluto. He moves into Aquarius for good. And he's going to be there till 2024. So we get a brief little window from the end of March until June 11th of kind of some of the themes that may be coming up for us as we go into 2024 and the next 2 decades. So it's a big deal because Pluto changes signs only it can be 12 to 20 years, depending on where Pluto is, because Pluto has an elliptical orbit, not a circular one. So its time varies in the different signs. However, the whole thing takes about 248 years for Pluto to go all the way around the zodiac. So that is a long time. No one will live through an entire Pluto cycle. It's just way too long. So it's a big deal when Pluto changes signs because it marks eras. Pluto rules entire generations. So it is a big deal when Pluto changes signs. So to put things in perspective, Pluto changed into the sign of Capricorn in 2008. And he's been there, for the past, 14, 15 years. So, this is a big change. He's been in Capricorn for a long time. Pluto was last in the sign of Aquarius between 1778 and 1798. So that gives you an idea of how long it takes for Pluto to go all the way around. So Pluto rules things like power and power dynamics. Pluto also rules the underbelly of things. So often it exposes where power has been used and abused. It brings all these sort of like ugly things to the surface. Pluto also rules transformation over time. So Uranus is also change, but Uranus is like sudden change. Pluto's about like the slow change of things over time. And once he changes things, they're done, because Pluto also rules death and he ends things. So he allows things to die so that new things can come in. So Pluto in Aquarius, I'm going to talk about in a minute some of the themes that we might see over the next 20 years, just from looking at Pluto going through Aquarius in the past. But just to kind of give you an idea of kind of, what the different signs and things Pluto's been through in, our lifetimes. So Pluto's been in Capricorn since 2008. So those born during those years are what we often call like the alpha generation. They'll probably come up with some other name later. 2008 was when there was the banking crisis and the housing crisis. Stock markets fell. Pluto, like he tends to like put an end to things where, maybe something's been going on behind the scenes for a while. It's been pretty sketchy, but he brings it to light. And often that's when things kind of can come crashing down, or there can be a crisis in that area. And Capricorn rules things like structures, like government, big institutions, banks, big business, that kind of thing. And he's about, Capricorn's very much about boundaries and walls. So we saw things like, the banking crisis that was perpetuated by, a lot of things that were going on behind the scenes that shouldn't have been going on. Same with the housing crisis as well. And then we also saw like governments trying to consolidate power. We saw around the world the rise of sort of more fascist type of governments, or things that were more nationalistic and more populist. That became a thing really in the past, decade or so, is something that really came to light, became more of a thing. So before that, Pluto was in Sagittarius between 1995 to 2008. And this is the millennial generation, right? This is the people who are considered, or pardon me, this is Gen Z, the Zoomer generation. So Gen Z, Gen G, Zoomer, whatever you want to call them, are born between 1995, 2008. And so Pluto in Sagittarius exposed things that had to do with, like, Sagittarius rules things like foreign policy. It tends to rule things like travel, immigration, also philosophy and religion. And so during Pluto and Sagittarius, we had the whole 9/11. We had a lot of changes to travel, how we travel around the world. There was also shifting dynamics because it was like the Cold War had ended, but now there was, sort of more issues in places like, like the Middle East and stuff. So those issues started to come to light. And also we had all the scandals and abuses come out from like the Catholic Church and other religious institutions because Sagittarius also rules religion. So we had some of those abuses come out as well. Then we had, before that, we had Pluto in Scorpio. And that was from about 83, 84 to 95. And Pluto in Scorpio, that is very much like the millennial generation. And Scorpio, has to do with things like sexuality. And that is really like the height of like, the AIDS crisis. It's also showed, how, the discrimination towards gay people as well. So it had a lot to do with like sexuality and revealing a lot of, some of the things that were going on because there was discrimination against, people who were gay that really came out during like the whole AIDS crisis, right? Showing that there was so much discrimination towards them. Scorpio, it also, because it has to do with sexuality, this is also like, the women's movement and women talking more about sexual abuse and things like that started to become like, more of a thing that was acceptable to talk about during that time. Same with people started going more to like psychologists and things. Like it was the start of things, starting to be talked about. Before that, we had Pluto in Libra. Pluto in Libra is from about 1972 to about 83, 84. This is the middle and younger Gen Xers. And Pluto in Libra, exposed some of the issues that came up with marriage because Libra rules issues like partnerships and marriage. So this is when divorce rates really started to spike because people were unhappy with the marriages they were in. Divorce laws had changed in lots of different parts of the Western world. And so people were able to get divorces. And then women started to be like, hey, we want more like equal rights, equal opportunities, because it's very much about egalitarianism, right? So Pluto tends to change things over time and also expose where things aren't fair. So he really rules, like changes in these kind of areas. And they're not overnight changes. They're things that often continue on, but he does spark those kind of changes. Now, if we look at Pluto in Aquarius, the last time Pluto was in Aquarius, as I said, was 1778 to 1798. And one of the themes of Aquarius is revolution. And that was like the end of the American Revolution, and the Americans started to form their own new government. We also had the French Revolution happen during that time. And it was also, there was the Haitian Revolution as well. So, prior to that was Pluto in Capricorn. And again, Pluto in Capricorn is about power structures. It is about governments and authority and authoritarianism to a certain degree. These were all reactions to things that people found to be overly authoritarian. So we had in the United States, I'm oversimplifying, all of these things are much more complex historically. But, there were people who did not want to pay taxes anymore to the British government. They didn't want to pay taxes. And this was actually like the richer people who didn't want to pay taxes. And so they decided that they wanted to form their own colonial government and not pay the king or the British government anymore. And they felt like the British government was like way over there. They didn't know what their needs were. They were ignoring them. So they decided to form their own government. So it was about bringing things back to like those people, bringing that power back. That's very much about Aquarius, right? And then we have the French Revolution, again, really oversimplifying things, but the French government at the time, the aristocracy was ignoring, there was like a shortage of food, there was famine going on. And thus we don't know if Marie Antoinette said it or not, but the famous line, let them eat cake, she probably didn't say, but that was a reaction to, well, people have no bread to eat, and it was just highlighting how ignorant she was and how separated she was from the reality of what was going on with everyday people. And so people started to have things like bread riots, and the women protested and rioted because they couldn't feed their children and stuff. And so that started the spiral towards the French Revolution. So, and then obviously in Haiti, there was people who were enslaved. they were revolting against terrible, horrible, exploitive conditions, and overthrowing the people who were, exploiting them and, forcing them to work on their plantations. So again, oversimplifying because these are all really complex, but basically it's people rising up against what they see as sort of authoritarianism or things that they view as unfair as the general kind of theme. Because Aquarius is about community and it is about the people, the collective. And so the collective gets tired of the authoritarianism and they say, okay, we want changes. And so we may see some of those echoes over the next 20 years. Now, will it look like, the French Revolution or anything like that? Hopefully not, because that ended rather badly with a lot of people's heads being cut off in the time known as the Terror, and it wasn't just rich aristocrats getting their heads cut off. So let's hope it doesn't go in that direction. But it never repeats exactly. But the themes repeat. They just repeat themselves in like new ways. So we may see that there are revolutions and revolts against what's seen as over-authoritarianism during the next 20 years or so. And every country's chart is different, so each country is going to have their own reaction and the way that they do things. So it doesn't necessarily mean that, anything major is going to happen where you live in the world, but it might. Who knows, right? So revolution is one of the themes going on. Another theme that's going on is technology, because technology really changed during those time periods as well. So again, just looking at the last period, that's the start of the Industrial Revolution. This is when like steam power becomes a thing. And that later on went to change things like, everything from how we move around the world with like trains and steamboats and how we operate factories, and really revolutionized the way we structure society and the way that we work and the way that we travel in ways that we hadn't seen prior to that. So really important, there may be technology over the next 20 years that really shifts and changes the way that we live, because the Industrial Revolution meant that most people tended to live in rural areas prior to this. They flocked into cities to find work. Cities really grew. You had goods being traded around the world. It was a lot easier to do those things because not only could you make things at a faster rate, but you could also send those things around the world at a faster rate than you had before. People could move around faster. You could go on a train, from the countryside to the city and get there a lot faster. You didn't have to take like a stagecoach or something like that. So it really revolutionized things. So we may see the start of something where things are really changing technologically wise, that will really change the way we work, maybe where we live, and transportation as well. We don't know what those will be, of course, but we'll see what happens over the next 20 years. And I think especially later on in 2025, when Uranus, who is also a ruler of technology, moves into the sign of Gemini, we may see some really accelerated technology during that time. Now, Aquarius is also an air sign, so it has to do with like air travel. And during the late 1700s, this is when they started to use hot air balloons. But hot air balloons had been around for a while, but they started to use them for things like reconnaissance in war. So you would send someone up in a balloon, and they'd be able to look at where like the enemy was like deploying their troops and things, and you'd be able to report back, right? And so that was like a big revolutionary thing to be able to do that. So, we already talk about things like drones being used, starting to be used more in warfare, which I think is really scary. But we may see things like that. I'm hoping that because of the association with air and community, we might see some breakthroughs in air travel that makes it more sustainable for the environment. I mean, I can hope, right? Another thing that Aquarius tends to rule is, the past periods of Pluto and Aquarius have also been about the movement of people around the world, sometimes invasion. It's like a scary word, right? But you think about like the 1700s, that is kind of like when colonialism, people started to really move around the world and go to these, new spaces. I say that because, people were already living there, right? But that was like sort of the height of those kind of things, or really people starting to move around the world much more. There was some of that in the 15 and 1600s, but this is when it really started to, take off and become more of a thing. If you look at the one prior to that in the 1500s, this is when I don't know my South American history super well, but this is when Cortez had, you know, went in and basically like the Incan Empire was decimated, which is obviously awful, very scary. But I don't want to scare people and be like, oh no, an invasion of something's going to happen. Already I see people who are like, oh, Pluto Aquarius means like alien invasion. Okay, that is, I think, a little extreme. But I think what we may see is the movement of people around the world more, and we may see that demographics are shifting and changing over the next 20 years. And what that's going to look like, I mean, who knows, right? It doesn't necessarily mean that anything's going to be like violent or negative or anything. It's just, it's the movement of people, because Aquarius is community. Aquarius is about people. It is about the collective, and also about power shifting to the collective. Some people have surmised that, you know, this might also be, you know, a shift in going away from more nationalistic type governments to people kind of identifying more with their community around them, which can be positive and negative, right? Like, you know, it could be positive to have, you know, some kind of alternative community structure, but it could be negative if we become segregated from each other across whatever demographic lines, right? So I think that that is something that we might see as well. So those are some of the themes. Another theme, though, I want to talk about is Aquarius is very much associated with like the rebel. So we may see over the next 20 years some really like kind of revolutionary thinking when it comes to things like art and things like music and fashion. And we may see like things really kind of accelerating as far as people, you know, exploring, experimenting with new things and new technology and new creative ways that can be like kind of exciting, right? So that could be like a really cool thing that might happen over the next 20 years. If you know your birth chart, look at your Aquarius house. Pluto's going to be moving there. He's going to be there for like, you know, the next 20 years or so. So take a look at that house in your chart. If you don't know what I'm talking about those things, you can look up your birth chart on, go to astro.com. You can put in your time of birth, day, obviously, and the place that you live, and it'll produce a birth chart for you. And look at the house. There's 12 slices to the pie. It's a circle and it's got 12 slices. Each slice is a 12th, of the pie, and each one rules a different area of your life. So this might be a little advanced for some people, but if you do kind of have a basic knowledge of birth charts, look at your Aquarius house, because that's where changes are going to go on in your life for the next 20 years. And it may not be anything dramatic. Like, don't expect on Thursday, March 23rd that something crazy and dramatic will happen. There might be the odd person that has that, but for the most part, it's going to be like slow, steady change that's going on in this area that's going to transform you in some way, because Pluto's always looking to transform things, right? So yeah, Pluto and Aquarius. It's pretty exciting. I did a whole blog about it. I'm going to link it below so that you can go and read if you want. But I thought I would do this here too and just talk to you about it and ask you what your thoughts are about what's going to happen over the next 20 years, where house Pluto or Aquarius is, in your chart. Let me know. Let me know what your thoughts are. I would love to hear them. Before I go, thank you so much to my patrons. You guys are the best. I really, really appreciate it. And, you know, if you guys want to check out my Patreon, please feel free to do so. I have weekly taroscopes and detailed astrology for the week. Plus we have a coven level, we have an academy level where we're going through the tarot and going through the astrology, like the planets and what they mean. And you can also sign up for private readings as well. And you can check out my Etsy shop too if you want a private reading. So I got to do all the plugs at the end, but thank you so much for watching. Thank you for all of your comments and everyone's patience. Thank you for all your comments, especially on the last video, because that was really, really nice. And as always, peace and love and rock.